The Greeks called Thoth Hermes, but Djehuty, the old ibis-headed god, did not disappear under the Greek name. In Kemet, he kept his own name, temples and sacred forms. Greek writers used Hermes as a match. Centuries later, that name grew into Hermes Trismegistus, the teacher behind a whole set of sacred books. We are going to follow the name from temple to map to dialogue and finally to manuscript. Here is the answer. Djehuty kept his cult, his animal forms, his temples, and his place in Kemetic ritual. Hermes became the Greek name used to explain some of his roles. Later, Hermes Trismegistus became a teacher in books. The three forms overlap, but they are not the same thing. No surviving decree gives us one official day when Djehuty became Hermes. We see the change in pieces. A Greek writer changes the name of a city, another places the god inside a debate about writing. Later writers give Hermes the work of Djehuty. Then books begin speaking in the name of Hermes Trismegistus. This gives the story two paths. In Kemet, the older god stays visible in temples, animal burials, and ritual images. Outside those places, the Greek name travels farther and farther. The tension between those two paths is the real aftermath, and the surviving evidence lets us follow both. Djehuty was already ancient when Greek writers began talking about him. He appears in the pyramid texts among the oldest surviving religious writings from Kemet. He remains present through later funerary writings, temple inscriptions, and the Roman period. Long before the name Hermes entered the story, Djehuty already carried a large set of duties. He was the divine scribe. He wrote down the decisions of the gods. He counted days and measured time. He watched the moon. He guarded sacred words. He could carry a message, settle a dispute, heal damage, or record a judgment. Each role placed him close to knowledge that had to be exact. His most familiar form was a man with the head of an ibis. He could also appear as a full ibis. In another form, he appeared as a baboon. The lunar disk and crescent sometimes rose above him. A reed and writing palette marked his work as scribe. The weighing of the heart shows that work clearly. Anpu, the guide of the dead, leads the dead person toward a balance. The heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the sign of right order. Djehuty stands beside the scale with his writing tools. He records the result before Asa, ruler of the dead, and the divine court. That small action matters. Djehuty does not swing the balance. He makes the judgment readable and permanent. A hidden truth becomes a written record. That is the part Greek writers later use most. The god who turns order into words. Djehuty also enters the long struggle between Heru and Set. In some texts, he heals the damaged eye of Heru. In others, he carries messages or helps settle the fight. He can defend order with words, knowledge, and ritual skill. Other texts give him rougher sides. He can be forceful, dangerous, or hard to trust. The old Kemetic god was much wider than the calm wise man image found in many later summaries. His main city was Khmun. Greek speakers later called the same place Hermopolis, which means the city of Hermes. The double name would become one of the clearest signs of the change. Near Khmun, at Tuna el-Gebel, sacred ibises and baboons were buried for centuries. Underground galleries held their bodies. A baboon statue stood in a cult room. Stelae carried titles linked to Djehuty and his city. These remains show that his local cult continued under Greek and Roman rule. They do not tell us the exact moment when Greek writers first called him Hermes. Now we can picture the older god clearly. Djehuty has an ibis head, a moon sign, a reed palette, a sacred city, animal forms, and a place beside the balance of the dead. The Greek name would carry some of these pieces into a new language. Other pieces would stay tied to Kemet. Greek contact with Kemet began long before Alexander arrived. At Naucratis, Greek merchants and settlers built sanctuaries and traded with nearby towns. Ships carried grain, pottery, and metal across the Mediterranean. They also carried names and stories. The comparison between Djehuty and Hermes had centuries of contact behind it. The written proof comes from Greek authors. The first examples take two different routes. One changes the city's name, while another keeps a form of the god's older name. In the 5th century before the Common Era, Herodotus wrote about the burial of sacred animals. When he reached the IBIS, he said the bird was taken to the city of Hermes. He meant Djehuty's city. In one short phrase, a Kemetic cult center entered a Greek account under a Greek god's name. Herodotus does not pause to explain Djehuty's full place in Kemetic religion. He swaps in Hermes and keeps moving. That makes the city easier for a Greek reader to place, while most of the local god remains outside the sentence. The written name now carries the story. A Greek reader can find the city through Hermes, even though the temple belongs to Djehuty. In Greek geography, the place becomes Hermopolis. In the local sacred world, it remains Khmun. Herodotus also says that many Greek divine names came from Kemet. That broad claim is his own view. The useful point here is smaller. He treats Djehuty and Hermes as a pair his readers can follow. Plato takes a different route. In the Phaedrus, he tells a story about an old god linked with the IBIS. Plato calls him Theuth, a Greek form closer to Djehuty's name. Theuth invents number, calculation, geometry, astronomy, games, and writing. He then presents writing to a king named Thamus. The king questions the gift. He says written marks may make people rely less on living memory. Plato uses the old god of writing to ask a Greek question about writing itself. No surviving Kemetic text gives us that exact conversation. The scene belongs to Plato's philosophy. Still, the consequence is clear. Djehuty has moved outside his temple setting. Herodotus places his city inside Greek geography. Plato places a version of him inside a Greek debate. An ibis-headed god can now be met through a sentence, a name, and an idea. That movement changes what can happen next. A temple image stays in one place. A written name can be copied. Another writer can take it, change it, and give it a new job. The Greek name has begun to travel. Then the political world around Djehuty changed. Alexander took control of Kemet in 332 before the Common Era. After his death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled from a Greek-speaking court. Greek became the main language of the court and much government business. Kemetic temples continued to work, train priests, hold land, keep calendars, and carve sacred texts. The two naming systems now lived beside each other every day. Djehuty remained active inside the temples. Hermes became the familiar Greek name used in Greek speech and writing. Khmun and Hermopolis were two names for the same sacred center. The tomb of Osiris shows what that mixed world looked like. Osiris was a high priest of Djehuty around the beginning of Macedonian rule. His tomb stands near Tuna el-Gebel. Its religious scenes remain Kemetic, but some human figures wear Greek-style clothing and move in poses shaped by Greek art. A harvest scene keeps familiar work from Kemet, while the bodies are drawn in a more Greek manner. The stone itself lets us see cultural contact before any writer explains it. The tomb records a world using more than one visual language. It gives us no ceremony where Djehuty is officially renamed. Instead, it shows local priestly life continuing, while Greek styles enter the same landscape. Tuna el-Gebel gives us a second kind of proof. The sacred animal burials continued into Greek and Roman times. Ibises and baboons remained tied to Djehuty. The galleries, the cult room, the statue, and the stele show that the old god kept a real home. Offerings and burial work tied generation after generation to the sacred animals of Djehuty. Greek rule did not wipe his Kemetic form from the site. Farther south, near Medinet Habu, a Ptolemaic temple of Djehuty survives at Qasr el-Aguz. Other Ptolemaic and Roman temples also show him with the ibis head. He still writes, measures, speaks sacred words, and takes part in the divine order. This gives us a much clearer picture than the word fusion usually suggests. On a Greek page, the city is Hermopolis. On a temple wall, the god is Djehuty. Greek documents and writers can use one name. Temple images and rites can keep the other. Both names can stay active at the same time. Why did Hermes fit at all? The Greek god also carried messages. He moved between gods and humans. He guided travelers and crossed dangerous boundaries. He was linked with speech, interpretation, trade, and cleverness. Those roles gave Greek writers something familiar to hold on to. The match still left a large gap. Greek Hermes did not come with an ibis head. He did not own Djehuty's local animal cult. He did not stand in the same place beside the weighing of the heart. Djehuty's moon role and his part in the fight between Heru and Set also had their own Kemetic roots. Translation always chooses. In this case, writing, speech, messages, calculation, and learned skill moved most easily. The ibis cemetery, the exact rites of Khmun, and many older mythic roles stayed closer to the temples. That choice was the first big change. Greek writers could now explain Djehuty through a god they already knew. At the same time, the older god remained visible in stone, ritual, and sacred animals. The two paths were now running together. By the 1st century, before the Common Era, Greek writers took the next step. Hermes began doing Djehuty's work inside Greek accounts of Kemet. Diodorus of Sicily says Hermes gave names to things and helped shape human language. He links Hermes with letters, the stars, music, sacred rules, and advice to kings. Under the Greek name, the god now carries the work of a divine scribe and learned counselor. Plutarch goes farther. In his book about Aset and Asar, he repeatedly calls Djehuty Hermes. Hermes wins extra days from the moon so that several gods can be born. He helps the claim of Heru. He is tied to reason, writing music, and sacred books. Plutarch even refers to books of Hermes. The move toward Hermes as an author is already underway. Plutarch is giving us a Greek reading of Kemetic religion. His account comes centuries after the oldest Kemetic texts. It cannot replace what the temple inscriptions say. It does show how natural the Hermes name had become for a Greek-speaking writer discussing Djehuty. Until this point, Hermes mainly works as a Greek match for the older god. Now the map changes. Hermes begins to look like the owner of ancient knowledge. The title Trismegistus helped make that happen. The Greek word means thrice-great. The title probably grew from a Kemetic way of praising Djehuty as great 3 times. In Greek, the praise became Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice-great. The surviving works do not all picture this figure in the same way. Sometimes he still stands close to a god. In other works, he speaks like a wise teacher from the deep past. In every version, Hermes speaks with the weight of an ancient master. He knows sacred words, the stars, the order of the world, and the path of the soul. Around the year 200, Clement of Alexandria describes priests in Kemet carrying books linked to Hermes. He says there were 42. Some dealt with hymns and ritual, others covered kingship, law, medicine, geography, and the stars. Those exact 42 books do not survive as one matching set. Clement makes the scene physical. One priest carries books for hymns, another handles books about the stars. A sacred scribe is linked with texts on geography, temple equipment, and the lands of Kemet. Other priests are tied to ritual, law, and medicine. The count may present an ideal order rather than a shelf we could rebuild today. Clement gives us a Greek-speaking Christian author's report rather than a temple catalogue. His list is late and highly organized. Even so, Clement shows that Greek-speaking writers strongly linked Hermes with the learned work of temple priests. Here the story changes. Earlier writers used Hermes to name Djehuty. Later writers used Hermes as the name behind sacred books. First it labels a city in Greek writing. Now it stands where an author's name would stand. That change depends on Djehuty's older reputation. He had been the divine scribe for centuries. He measured time, watched the moon, guarded ritual speech, recorded judgments, and advised the gods. A writer who placed ancient wisdom under his name could borrow all of that weight. Greek Hermes added something useful too. He was a messenger who crossed borders. He moved between levels of the world. He made messages understandable. Those traits fit a teacher who could bring hidden knowledge to a human student. We still have to keep one limit in place. No surviving record names the first person who joined Hermes, Djehuty, and the title Trismegistus into one book figure. There is no known meeting where the new identity was approved. We can follow the stages, but the first exact moment is gone. By then, however, the result was already powerful. Djehuty had gained a Greek name. The Greek name had gained the authority of Kemet, and Hermes Trismegistus was ready to speak. The next stage began in Roman Kemet and survives through later manuscripts. During the first few centuries of the Common Era, different writers produced works under the name Hermes Trismegistus. Many were written in Greek. Much later, some were gathered into the collection now called the Corpus Hermeticum. These works did not come from one historical man named Hermes. They were written by more than one author. Their styles and teachings differ. The shared name gave them an ancient teacher. It appears on philosophical dialogues, astrological guides, healing texts, and works of ritual power. The books did not form one perfectly matched system. The name Hermes was what linked them. In several dialogues, Hermes speaks with students such as Tat or Asclepius. A student asks about God, the mind, the cosmos, the soul, or spiritual rebirth. Hermes answers as the master of hidden knowledge. In one famous text, a divine mind reveals the order of creation to him. Hermes then carries that teaching to others. Other works under his name are more practical. They deal with astrology, medicine, alchemy, magic, stones, plants, images, and the timing of rituals. Across the wider Hermetic tradition, religion, philosophy, medicine, and magic often overlap. Most scholars place these Greek writings in Roman Kemet. The exact groups who wrote them are still debated. Some may have belonged to learned circles connected with temples. Others clearly knew Greek philosophy. The evidence points to a mixed world, but it does not give us one school, one room, or one founder. A demotic work now called the Book of Thoth makes the question even sharper. It survives in many broken pieces. The text uses dialogue to explore scribal learning. Some passages sound like a master testing a seeker. Scholars still disagree about the speakers and the exact setting. The relationship between this work and the Greek Hermetic writings remains disputed. They share a world where a master passes sacred learning to a student, with Djehuty or Hermes giving the teaching its authority. The surviving evidence does not prove that the Greek Corpus Hermeticum was translated straight from one Kemetic Book of Thoth. That is where the line stops. From here, the copied text carries the name. A stone temple stays where it was built. A copied text can leave the city. It can cross a sea. It can enter a private library. It can be translated into another language. A reader no longer needs to stand before an IBIS-headed relief. He can meet Hermes in a question and answer. He can hear the ancient teacher explain the stars or the soul. That is how the Greek name moves far beyond Khmun. So what actually survived from Djehuty inside Hermes? Writing survived first. Djehuty records the result at the weighing of the heart. Hermes Trismegistus teaches through spoken and written words. In both settings, knowledge becomes clear enough to guide a decision or a student. Numbers and the sky survive too. Djehuty counts time and watches the moon. Plato Theuth invents calculation and astronomy. Diodorus links Hermes with the stars. Hermetic works later discuss the cosmos, the stars and their timing. The messenger role survived too. Djehuty carries decisions between gods. Greek Hermes carries messages between worlds. Hermes Trismegistus carries teaching from a divine source to a human listener. The exact stories differ, but the role keeps moving knowledge from one side of a boundary to the other. Several parts of Djehuty grew faint in the version that traveled. The IBIS head becomes less important in the philosophical dialogues. The sacred baboon almost disappears. The philosophical dialogues leave the animal cult of Tuna, el-Gebel behind. They also leave behind the local rites of Khmun, the weighing of the heart, and Djehuty's difficult role in the struggle of Heru and Set. Greek texts carried a version that was easier to copy and read beyond Kemet. That version reached farther, but it carried less of the god's local body. It kept the scribe, the teacher, the stars, and sacred speech. It left much of the temple, the animals, and the older myths behind. Political power helped decide which name traveled farther. Under Ptolemaic and Roman rule, Greek held a strong place in government, education, and writing across the eastern Mediterranean. The languages of Kemet continued in daily life and temple ritual. A Greek book could move through a much wider reading network than one local temple cult. Inside Kemet, Djehuty remained active. The stone images remained. The temples continued for centuries. The animal cult at Tuna el-Gebel continued. A person living in Roman Kemet could encounter Djehuty in a sanctuary and Hermes in Greek writing during the same broad period. We do not know how every priest, reader, or worshipper understood that overlap. Some may have treated the two names as close matches. Others may have kept their roles more separate. The surviving sources give us stages, not one rule followed by everyone. Those stages are clear enough to trace. Herodotus puts Hermes on the city. Plato keeps Theuth and turns the god into a debate about writing. Diodorus and Plutarch give Hermes several of Djehuty's powers. Clement links Hermes with priestly books. The Hermetic dialogues let Hermes Trismegistus speak as the teacher. The cost and the gain sit together. The Greek name carried Djehuty farther than the local cult could travel. It also reduced the full Kemetic god to the parts later writers wanted most. Djehuty gained reach under Hermes, while much of Djehuty stayed behind. By late antiquity, the old temple system was closing, and Djehuty was losing the public institutions that had served him for centuries. The Greek name kept moving because books could survive the loss of a sanctuary. One Hermetic work, called the Asclepius, survived in Latin through the medieval period. Most of the Greek philosophical collection reached Western Europe much later. Around 1460, Greek Hermetic manuscripts arrived in Florence. Marsilio Ficino translated the Greek collection into Latin, and Renaissance readers treated Hermes Trismegistus as a voice from the deepest ancient past. Renaissance readers believed those writings were far older than scholars date them today. That mistake gave Hermes enormous prestige. Philosophers, theologians, astrologers, and students of magic read him as a witness from the beginning of wisdom. The name had moved from Roman Kemet into medieval Latin and Renaissance Europe. Yet much of the later teacher's prestige came from Djehuty. The name carried ancient weight because the temple god had already ruled writing, time, sacred speech, and judgment for thousands of years. Now return to the weighing of the heart. Djehuty stands beside the balance. His reed touches the record. He writes down what the scale has shown. Move forward to a Hermetic dialogue. A student asks a question. Hermes gives an answer. The setting has changed. The body has changed. The old link between knowledge and written order is still there. That is what happened when the Greeks called Thoth Hermes. Djehuty remained rooted in the temples, myths, animals, and sacred language of Kemet. Greek writers used Hermes to explain the roles they recognized. Later writers widened that Greek name into Hermes Trismegistus, the teacher behind sacred books. The change was gradual. It happened through city names, stories, temple life, priestly learning, and copied pages. During the centuries when both forms were active, the Greek name did not erase the older god from Kemet. It carried a selected part of him into a much larger reading world. The IBIS stayed beside the scale. The name crossed the sea.